job offer ultimately ended up increasing my on-target earnings by 80% by making this move.
Today I'm speaking with Jack Delahanty, who transitioned from an operations role into a sales engineering job, and in doing so, he increases income by 80%, which is a life-changing amount of money. And the best part is, he did it without any connections starting out, and he hardly submitted any job applications at all. He's going to share how he went about it in this conversation. All right, let's get into it. So,
Yeah.
Jack, thanks for joining me today. Really appreciate you hopping on. I'm excited about this conversation because you have a phenomenal story that is worth sharing with so many people, because I think it's going to be very helpful for people in their career journey. Like, ultimately, you ended up making a career transition into a brand new sales engineering role, and you increased your income by over 80%, which is life-changing. And for everybody that's listening, like that's something that's going to be very interesting to learn from as far as the steps that Jack took to get there. So that's what this conversation is going to be about, and excited to get into it. But Jack, before we dive into the nitty gritty of your story and your transition, like, tell us a little bit about yourself and your situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So happy to give some background. My name is Jack Delahanty. But yeah, as Yuji mentioned, I recently just landed a new job, something that I'm super excited about. But my background is in industrial and systems engineering. It's a type of field that's really focused on process improvement. It's often a role that plays a part in operations. So my previous roles have been more focused on operations. I started to work a little bit more into the product space. And that's really where I started to learn about opportunities and roles at tech companies, and specifically roles in the pre-sales side of things, roles like solutions consultants, sales engineers. And that had been something that I really started to keep my eye out for. It felt like something that would be a really good fit for me, blending some of my softer people skills with some of my technical background, but also just roles that provide a lot of flexibility, work-life balance, the opportunity to be fully remote. And then obviously the compensation side of things is another huge benefit. So excited to talk a little bit about that. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's a little bit of background on me.
I love that. Tell us a little bit about why you started looking for a new job then. I mean, you mentioned compensation, and that's certainly what makes sales engineering roles very attractive, is a compensation can be quite solid. But tell us a little bit more about, like, why you want to make a transition.
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, the current role that I have been working in is much more internally focused, right? So I'm working within the scope of our one company, but I loved the idea of working a little bit more externally facing, getting to work with a lot of different companies and solving unique challenges that they face. And then obviously the idea of my work having a direct impact on my compensation was something I was also really excited about. I just love the idea that the harder that I work, the more effort that I put in, the more I will be rewarded. So that was another area that I was really excited about.
I love that. When did you start your transition, or when did you get it in your mind that, hey, I want to start this process of trying to become a sales engineer?
Yeah. So it's really been somewhat of a long time coming, but to be honest, it was a pretty casual search at first. I was pretty happy with where I was at, so I wasn't pushing the gas down too hard and really wanted to make sure I was waiting for the right opportunity to come along. So I would say it's been, a little over a year that I've been just casually keeping my eyes out for the right fit, the right company, the right product that I would be really excited about, because I didn't want to just leave for something that I wasn't fully passionate about.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes complete sense. Well, talk to me a little about some of the challenges that you experienced, or maybe that you thought you'd have to overcome as you were looking to make this transition into a fairly new role.
For sure. Yeah. So not coming from a background in pre-sales or really even at an established tech company, I was a little bit worried about, is my experience going to be enough to get my foot in the door in one of these roles where I don't have that direct pre-sales experience. I definitely viewed that as a challenge, and had actually run into a couple different instances where I was reaching out to hiring managers, asking about roles that were open on their team, having some early conversations, and then coming to realize, like, hey, you're not really the best fit for what we're looking for this role, whether it be a little bit, we're looking for somebody with some of that experience, or specific to, AI and machine learning. We'd really love somebody with more of that niche background. So I did run into some of those challenges, but I really didn't want to let it stop me from pushing forward and looking for that right opportunity, because along the way I did receive good feedback from those people just around, hey, this might not be the best fit for you, but you've got some of these skills that they could see, and they encouraged me to keep looking for that right fit.
Got it. How did you think about approaching overcoming some of those gaps on the technical side of your skill set?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I'd start to learn a little bit about what specifically they're looking for, being able to, speak to things, more complex concepts, things like APIs, for example. Wasn't something I had ton of knowledge in my previous roles, but doing some research on those topics to be able to speak the lingo, talk to those things, frame it up in ways that show and demonstrate that, hey, I can actually learn some of these harder concepts and start to put it into practice. I think those are really helpful ways that I was able to overcome some of those challenges and ultimately aligning that with the right fit, making sure that it's not a role that really is too above what my expertise is. I think that was another good aspect.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think a common misconception that I often hear when working with career changers is that people feel like they have to be an expert in some sort of technology or really learn the technical skills so deeply before even trying to go after these jobs, when the reality is, to your point, you just have to kind of get more comfortable with talking about it and conversational about it. So you need a pretty good understanding, but you certainly don't need to be the expert for ultimately getting hired into these roles. And that seems like exactly what you did, got to that level, because of course you're going to learn so much when you actually get on the job. And even when you're on the job, frankly, you can be on the job for years and still never be an expert. You're always learning. And so part of it is just demonstrating the hiring team that you have learned enough and can be conversational about different technologies.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. Now, talk to us a little bit about how you got ultimately the interview for the job that you landed. How was your approach to get into the interview process? And then after that, I want to get into like the specifics of how you stood out and impressed during the interview process. But how did you get that first interview or set of interviews with the company that you just joined?
Yeah, so it's great to kind of reflect on. But early on in that process, I guess I sort of planted some different seeds from networking, making connections on LinkedIn, a lot of just reaching out to people who were currently in the target role that I had and chatting with them really with no major intentions at that time. I wasn't looking for a ton in return, but ultimately planting those seeds so early on ended with some fruit down the road. So I had reached out to somebody who was in that sales engineer role a long time ago, had a quick intro conversation with her and just learned more about the role, the company. And she was super helpful and actually, mentioned, hey, if there's anything, I can do down the road to help you, the door is always open. So I definitely utilized her when it came time and I was looking for this role a little bit more intentionally when I saw the posting. So after that connection, I mean, it had been months that had went by, but seeing the job posting come up, it reminded me, hey, I actually talked to this person and I want to reach out just to see, is there an opportunity for a referral or connecting me to a hiring manager? So shot just a quick note out and said, hey, nice chatting with you a few months ago. Here's this role that's open. I'd be interested in applying for it. Would appreciate just anything you could do, whether it's a referral, connect me to the hiring manager. And she very quickly was open to doing that. I'm not even fully sure if they have referral bonuses or if there's anything in it for her, but she was kind enough to do that. She passed along the name of the hiring manager, which I then reached out to him to just express my interest and applied to the role. But then I also had a few other connections at the company UiPath that I had been speaking with, and ultimately just it was a matter of kind of curating all of these different connections and then ultimately asking for a little bit of help at that process to just kind of ping the hiring manager, mention my name. And I think all of that went a really long way, and we can get into that a little bit more later, but made it just super easy for me to get my foot in the door for that first.
That's great, man. And that's literally the playbook that we talk about so often as far as building the network, building connections, not when you need just the job right away, but proactively ahead of time. So when that job does open up, that you have the relationships already within the company to then help refer you in. And that's exactly what happened here, which is, we hear this story a lot, but it's literally the playbook. And just to clarify, you mentioned the connections that you had, right? You didn't have any connections in the company prior to building them yourself, right? Prior to reaching out to people on your own. So you created those connections because you knew eventually they would come in handy to you when trying to transition into this SE role of yours.
Yeah.
That's great. But you've now developed this pretty good network within pre-sales. You haven't even started in your first role, you're starting in a week here or so, and you already have this really great foundational network through all that work that you've done that helped you ultimately get the job, but also you have all these connections to all these other companies for the future, right? And that's the beauty of developing and investing in your professional network for your career, not just for this initial job. So I love that you did that and you continue to do that. Hey, I hope you're finding the tips in this video helpful so far. If you wouldn't mind giving this video a like, I really appreciate it. And don't forget to subscribe to get more content that will help you advance in your career. All right, back to the conversation. Yeah. So then you ultimately got referred in, right, through some of the people that you made connections with into ultimately getting an interview. Like, what are some things that you did through the interview process to stand out? Talk to us a little bit about that interview process and how it went.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for those of you who are maybe not familiar with the pre-sales interview process or interviewing for tech company roles in general, the process can be quite rigorous and there's quite a few different rounds of interviewing. But just throughout that interview process, I always made sure to do a little bit of research on the person who would be interviewing me. So, whether that was taking a look at their LinkedIn, just doing a Google search to see, like, hey, maybe they've got articles out there or videos on YouTube, like demoing this product and software. So, just trying to learn and understand a little bit more about what they may be looking for specifically in a candidate. So I think that was always something that I did just to make sure that I was going in to the interview feeling confident that, like, hey, I know what boxes I should be trying to check along this process, but then also preparing specifically, if it's a recruiter who's interviewing me, what types of questions may a recruiter be asking? And I think that's where a lot of the Better Career resources really came in handy, just trying to understand along the way, along each of those steps, depending on the stakeholder, what kind of questions should I be prepared to answer and how should I be answering questions? Using the STAR method, I think, is one that works really well for different situational questions, but leveraging the 3 C's that are talked about in Better Career, I think just is really helpful to help prepare for those interviews and really stand out. So definitely leaned heavily on the interview prep side of things, not just going in blind. I think it helped with my confidence, but then also came through in my ability to interview.
That's great. Yeah. And I'm glad to hear that our resources were helpful to you in preparing for your interviews. I know you mentioned previously that you also leveraged ChatGTP a bit throughout the process. Maybe provide a few examples of how you use ChatGTP if you're really curious to hear, because it's something that people ask a lot about.
I'm somewhat of a nerd when it comes to generative AI and have really loved leveraging tools like ChatGPT to prep for just different aspects of the job search process, the interview process. It can be a really valuable tool when you've got resources like the Better Career resources on, like, hey, here's how to form a response to an interview question. Providing that sort of context in a prompt to ChatGPT and then saying, hey, here's the job that I'm interviewing for. It really allows you to tailor your responses without you having to use just a ton of brain power on that exercise. It just really streamlined your approach to building out your repertoire of responses and how you walk through them, so that by the time you're interviewing, you've got almost a catalog of things that have been prepared. And without something like ChatGPT, that would take hours of time, but with it, you can do that very quickly. So that was a very helpful tool that I leveraged, not only for, applying for the role, tailoring my resume, but also during that interview process.
It's such a great tool to use for so many different things, but it's, even as a job seeker and somebody who's interviewing, it can be very helpful to just help you think about things differently or help you plan and prep. So I love that you're a real example of how it's been effective in getting a really good job. Just thinking back to, maybe towards the end of the interview process or at the very end when they give you the job offer, what was there anything else that maybe the hiring team mentioned as far as feedback as to some things that they were really impressed by, things that you did or ways that you stood out to them?
Yeah. So I think, the hiring manager had mentioned near the end of the process just how impressed he was with the fact that I was able to surround him, various people at his gate who were in his ear mentioning my name to him. I think he was a little bit, it's just as to, like, you do that. He viewed it as, demonstrative of my ability to be determined and network and make those kinds of connections, all things that are really valuable for the role that I was interested in. So I think that was just one thing that really stuck out. And then in addition, I got some feedback after doing a mock demo just on my ability to personalize or tailor things specifically to the audience. And I think that went a long way as well, not just delivering some sort of generic version of something, but really being specific in my approach.
And I'm glad to hear that that network that you developed to even get the first interview continued to help you throughout the interview process to stand out and impress the hiring team. That's amazing. So now you got to the end, right? And they selected you and they gave you that job offer. Tell us a little bit about that job offer that you got relative to your what you're making previously, and if you were able to also get a more through ultimately negotiating that job offer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was really excited about the offer. It was very competitive. I had known that I would likely be a competitive offer just based on the industry, but the job offer ultimately ended up increasing my on target earnings by 80% by making this move, something that I was very excited about, feeling like, man, this is really going to change ultimately the trajectory of my career as far as earnings go. So I was super excited about that. But yeah, the negotiation process was another thing that I was a little bit, just interested in going into it. But having some of the resources from Better Career was really helpful just to put my mind at ease, is just to know like, hey, here are the steps that it takes to negotiate an offer. And leveraging some of those recommendations, I was able to drive that offer, the on target earnings, up an additional 6% from what I was originally offered, which was just super exciting.
That's great to hear. And yeah, sometimes it just takes a little bit of a strategy and the confidence to make the request, and you can get thousands more on top of your initial offer. And for you, that was overall the difference from what you're making before and what you'll be making now is significant, right? 80% can be massively life changing for a lot of people. And just kind of, and to your point, it's not just like this one time, it sets you up to now earn a lot more throughout your career from making this big jump. So it's just, I'm super excited for you and happy for you for making this jump. And it just seems like such a good opportunity. So thanks for sharing, that experience. I guess the next thing I'd ask is just, you mentioned a few ways that Better Career and our program and the resources have kind of helped you in your journey. Was there anything else that you'd love to mention about how we helped, or the resources that we provide have helped you?
Yeah. So, I mean, just to get a little specific on that, resources out there provided by Better Career, whether it's the newsletter, the blog resources, or just, having you as a resource, I think it was very valuable just from doing things like structuring my resume, what to include in that, the process of networking, landing interviews, prepping for interviews, and then obviously like the negotiation process, everything along the way. I leaned a lot on Better Career just to navigate that. And ultimately, I think I can really point to that as a strong reason why I ended up where I did. So definitely would recommend all the resources provided by Better Career, and obviously the Job Accelerator program. I just think, I personally think it's such a steal for anybody out there who's maybe struggling or interested in some sort of program to really help supercharge their process, considering the cost of the program and then just what that might mean for your compensation. The payback is almost instant as soon as you land that offer, especially considering things like the negotiation. It's crazy to me that that is available to those out there, and I would highly recommend it to anybody.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, you're right. It can be an investment, especially for somebody that's looking to make a career pivot or move, or maybe somebody that's been laid off, but it ultimately provides such a great return when we talk about some of the numbers that, people are able to increase their compensation by. Jack is just one example of many other people making big career moves and drastically increasing their income. If you want to learn more about how we at Better Career help people just like you, check out the link below to learn more about our Job Accelerator program. Well, we're about to wrap up, and I appreciate you walking us through the journey, Jack, and sharing all the insight and lessons. I hope a lot of people that are listening will get a lot from this as far as things that they can do in their job process or job search process. But maybe before we get off, I do want to ask, for any final advice that you have for anybody else that is looking to make a career transition, a career pivot, or is just generally in their job search. Any other advice that you want to leave us with?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of this job search process, it can be really daunting and just feel like it's a lot of work. But to be honest, if you leverage the right resources like Better Career, I personally think it's really less work in the long run if you're doing it right and being focused, because you don't have to go and apply to 300 jobs. With the Better Career resources and taking that targeted approach, you can apply to 5 jobs and end up getting 3 interviews. And it takes a little bit more work up front, but honestly, I think it's a much more strategic approach that I think really pays off. So,
well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate you again sharing your story and the insight. It's going to help a lot of people, and I'm excited to continue to watch you on your journey as you start in your new role. And I know you're going to do amazing things in it and lead an amazing career as an SC within the pre-sales world. So I'm excited to see your new chapter in your career really take off. All right. Well, that, thanks again, Jack.
Really appreciate your time today and everything that you've done for me and all those who are looking for roles. So I think it goes a long way.